Welcome to this episode of AgriAlly, featuring Rhishi Pethe, a visionary leader at the intersection of AI and agriculture. Rhishi and I connected on a mutual passion over the applicability of AI in agriculture, his diligence and aim for a comprehensive image of this industry, and my curiosity for all things agtech. His background covers leadership roles at Google's Mineral AI, Bayer's The Climate Corporation, and Amazon, as well as other tech companies. He's led 2 startups through exits and 1 through a spin-out. He has extensive experience in artificial intelligence, supply chain and logistics, product development, data and technology strategy, and robotics and computer vision, as well as sustainability and data interoperability. He is the creator of the widely acclaimed weekly newsletter, Software is Feeding the World, through which he's been instrumental in fostering dialogue and driving awareness around the transformative potential of technology in agriculture. I appreciate Rishi's efforts a lot, and I've invited him due to his perspective and relentless commitment to driving innovation and positive change in agriculture. The purpose of this episode together is to bring you perspective on AI in this industry while covering his journey in AI converging with agriculture, entry barriers and facilitating access to women and youth in this industry, and how companies and policymakers can use AI to boost inclusion as well as adoption in agriculture, based on his recent course on AI for AgriFood leaders. So join the thought-provoking conversation with Rhishi, exploring his perspective on inclusion, technology, sustainability, and agriculture on today's episode of the AgriAlly podcast.
Thanks, Thea, for having me. I'm also excited to be here and talk about these issues. And I want to congratulate you on the work that you've been doing to see how more people can come into this space and contribute and make a meaningful impact.
Like we're both passionate about what we do. We're both committed to the journey that we've begun on in terms of agriculture and technology, and I think it's about also curiosity that we both dabble with this on a daily basis. You especially in terms of technology, and I with myself with people with all the processes that take place in the agriculture industry. So it's again fascinating for me every time I start talking about it.
Yeah.
I realized, and while I was preparing the episode for today, that it's close to a year when I found out about Mineral and your work there, and it was so excited to see. It felt like I was peeling a layer and seeing more and more amazing topics on agriculture that can influence and that can support agriculture, especially artificial intelligence. So it's amazing how I realized that your work and your background can support agriculture and technology, and of course inclusion, because the main reason for and a goal for today is to speak about inclusion for women and youth in agriculture. Because, for example, in the past few weeks, I've had more and more discussions about aging population and aging workforce. And I know you had the labor dilemma article on your newsletter, and it was great to see how well it paired with the overall discussion nowadays in terms of labor, of age, of proficiency, and implication. Because I noticed that a lot of people, again, the perception is that they believe that farming and agriculture is still outdated. And yet so many people and so many farms right now use technology that people would just be in awe to find out, for satellite images to sensors and so many amazing robots. And I think it's fascinating. I really do appreciate how all your work has led you to come into agriculture. So that's why I was nerding about you being here, because I want us today to inspire as many young people in agriculture to address this issue of more and more people being not only interested in this industry, but starting to work in it. because it's about food, it's about ensuring food on people's tables, and it's about the climate, it's about the continuation of humanity as we know it. And as long as more and more people are working and talking about this, I think it's a great opportunity for this entire food system to improve. So thank you again for being here, and I'm hoping you can introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can dig into the questions.
So, in terms of my personal background, I grew up in India, um, and it was a reasonable sized town, and a lot of good folks around me, both from a family standpoint and the friends I've had over the years. Um, and more than 25 years ago, I came to the United States for higher education, which was um, quite the rage, and it continues to be today. And I had studied. I was in tech. I was studying technology even for my bachelor's program and my graduate program, and I studied a lot about optimization problems within the supply chain. And so in the early days, I worked on a lot of large optimization problems for different supply chains. And some of them were in the food and beverage space. And this was right around the dot-com bust in the early 2000s. And that was a very interesting experience of how you can actually apply cutting edge technology to solve problems. And by the mid 2000s, I was already working on some more cutting edge things like SaaS models were pretty new at that point of time.
Yeah.
Around 2005 or so, I was already working on SaaS models for delivering logistics and supply chain related technologies through a SaaS model. Cloud was coming along, and I went through that transition, and it was very painful to go through that process. It's much easier now. And there I probably had one of my best managers at that company, and hopefully we'll talk about the role of mentors in the future.
Absolutely.
And then after that, I spent a few years there. I also had an appointment to work at Amazon Kindle, which was a crazy time there in terms of experiencing a lot of growth, and ebooks were new. And again, I was fortunate to be at the cutting edge of technology. After that, I worked at two startups with some exits there. And then somehow by accident, I landed up at the Climate Corporation. So I had not really worked in agriculture before that. And which was also a big learning curve for me because I didn't know anything about agriculture before that point. This was maybe 6-7 years ago. And from a role standpoint, I always worked as a product and a technology person, and so that led me to Mineral. I'm no longer with Mineral. Worked on some interesting AI applications within food and agriculture systems, and right now I work as a product and a technology strategy consultant. So over the last 25 years, I have been fortunate to work on some cutting edge business models and technology and applying them to different industries, food and beverage, grocery retail, and now last couple of years in agriculture and food technology.
It's amazing to be right there when technology boomed, and I think that's where most of those innovative breaking points happened. Breaking points in a way as moments of evolution where people were extremely poised to actually disrupt technologies and how things were going back then. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to see, and it's one of the reasons for which I wanted us to have this conversation today, because you bring this wealth of knowledge of how things started off in that part of the technology with SaaS models and these pioneering companies like the Climate Corporation and Amazon. So it's absolute gold for me. and for everybody listening and for everybody wanting to dive into agriculture. And of course, I would love to approach the topic of mentors, because one of the reasons that I stayed in agriculture was due to my mentor, and he was entirely passionate about this industry, and I know how much it changed my life. So of course, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think the role of mentors is very important, irrespective of which field you are in, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're working in a corporate environment, whether you're a sports person, a musician, doesn't matter what you are. I think it's so critical to find good mentors who can guide you, who can support you when you have moments of doubt. And so I think that is super important. I don't think it's specific to this field. I think that is true for, it doesn't matter what you do.
Absolutely. It's great for having, as you said, the support you need and the support you don't even know you need in those kind of moments. And to be honest, I still have mentors. It's something that I do on a monthly basis. I stay connected with people that are in industry or in specific areas of business. And I take away this juicy information because I believe, and I think it reflects, and it will reflect throughout all the episodes in this initiative, that it is extremely important for everybody to take away that juicy knowledge from all the people before us who did things, who failed, and to learn from all their failures, from their mistakes, from their successes. And that's what we'll know what to do and what not to do in the future. It's not rocket science, even though it is a little bit involved, the aspect of rocket science in agriculture. It really, it's absolutely amazing what people can do with the right people surrounding them with mentors and advisors, and towards enlarging their networks, because everybody knows how when you have your ear to the ground, you can connect people much easier. So I think this is one of the aspects that I encourage people to say what your experience has been, and how can I take away from you something that I can actually give to somebody else over. So it's kind of a ripple effect. So talking about the idea of mentorship and how originally it starts at a young age, and hopefully it does, what do you believe are the entry barriers from what you've seen so far in terms of coming into agriculture and agri-tech?
Yeah, I think they are similar with some nuances, right? So within agriculture, I think some of the biggest barriers, because you need access to certain resources to actually farm or do agriculture, getting access to those resources is one of the biggest entry barriers, right? So, for example, land ownership is a huge challenge. And there are different sort of social and legal things in terms of how inheritance laws work in different parts of the world, and oftentimes they disadvantage women, especially, and making it difficult for them to own or control land for farming. So I think just getting access to land is a big challenge. And let's say you're lucky, you get access to land to farm. You also have challenges in getting access to finance and other resources, right? Typically, women face difficulties in securing loans. And I know this is a very generic statement, and things are different depending on which part of the world you are in. But there are issues in terms of gender-based issues. You might not have the right collateral to get a loan, and I think this is something you and I talked about last time we spoke, where
Yeah.
even where you are, you've experienced those type of issues, and where I grew up in India, that is still a challenge. I think that is one thing. Other issues are sort of social and cultural barriers. There are predefined norms and gender roles, and especially prevailing social norms may limit ability especially for women, for roles in agriculture, and discourage them from decision making. There's lack of training and extension services. and they might not get the same level of technical training. I mean, it's a joke, but it's true that when you go to buy a new car or any kind of technical thing, you have somebody coming to your house to fix something. That person will talk to the man in the house and they'll ignore the woman, right? Because they think she's not the decision maker. It happens, more frequently than we would like. So there are those type of issues which are obviously there, and that going back to role models, that creates another issue that there is a lack of female role models. If I'm a woman trying to come into this space, because of the issues that you talked about, if I'm looking for a woman role model, it becomes harder. Obviously, things are improving quite a bit, but that can become harder. If we talk about so the work environments, those can also be unwelcoming sometimes for people. Yeah, we can go into more detail, but these are some of the, at least on the agriculture side, those are some of the challenges that I've seen, especially for women.
Well, that's the point of this whole discussion, because I'm aware that more and more people know about these, and I'm trying to push through these barriers and kind of offset the perceived barriers with the openness and the access to it. There are more and more programs out there encouraging women to get into agriculture, for example, and entrepreneurship, and, as you say, like, own land and actually develop farms and so on. And there are more and more women, and I'm entirely in awe of how much of go-getters there are out there in terms of female entrepreneurs and female farmers. For example, this week I will have a conversation with a female farmer, and she is 19 years old.
Oh, wow. That's
And
pretty impressive.
it is entirely amazing how she is able to do this farming for it's horticulture, and she is interested in drones, in greenhouse technology, and I am in awe, because I can see that if there is just one role model, then I know that we can propagate this, and showing them more and more that this is possible and how this can be done, and pitching in, whether it's time, energy, money. And I know that there are VCs out there who are passionate about supporting women in agriculture, and organizations. And yeah, I know it's about culture as well. And it's a thing that we're going to have to work together. And I think this is what we're doing, even as we're speaking about this.
Yeah.
And in terms of technology, what have you seen so far in terms of youth, male or female, regardless, getting into this industry and seeing how it can apply to agriculture and food and biotech as well?
Yeah, I think some of the access to resources problem is as applies to youth as well, not just women. Unless you have a family farm, it's going to be very difficult to, or very expensive to, find land, and that you can do something about it. I think it is a little bit easier on the tech side, and that is something that I'm very excited about, because I believe that with more and more adoption of technology like AI and other things, I think what it means to farm itself will change, and it will create hopefully newer types of skill sets that are required, and newer types of jobs that are required to farm. So it's going to hopefully, not hopefully, I'm pretty confident it's going to change what it means to farm. And I think that is going to create a lot of opportunities for younger people who are thinking from how to apply technology to solve different problems, to do that. So I think those challenges are there. We talked about sort of access to education, or access to know-how. I think that continues to be a challenge for anybody coming into this space, because it's complicated. There are cultural issues in terms of how people are used to doing things.
Yes.
And so when I was at the Climate Corporation, I came from a technology angle, and I didn't know anything about agriculture. And then there are a lot of people who had spent a lifetime doing agriculture in a certain way, but they were sort of still coming up to speed on some of the digital technologies, right? And so there was always a challenge in having these two groups to have a conversation, because oftentimes these two groups would talk past each other. And both sides were at fault to some degree, because you kept sort of hammering your viewpoint and your lens, and the other side kept doing the same. And so I think the more that we see this osmosis of ideas between somebody who has not had exposure to a lot of the latest tools and somebody who has. And I think given the way we're talking about how farming might evolve itself, both these ideas and both these tools have to work together to actually have better outcomes. So this is going to require a lot of collaboration and mentorship on both sides. And again, I don't want to sort of say there are two sides. That's how it felt when I joined Climate, and things are getting better as more and more people think about these issues. But that cultural sort of difference was real, and that was a challenge. So if I'm a young person coming in, and if I see this, and if I don't come in with the right attitude, and if I don't have the right mentors, and if I just talk about the digital side, the tech side, and nobody sort of guides me to say, hey, this is how you listen to other people who have a lot of experience, then I'm going to get frustrated. So I think having those mentors is super critical at that early stage of your career on doesn't matter again which field you are in, so that you understand how to listen, how to learn, how to be curious, and how to think about these challenges in a different way. So I think those entry barriers are sort of similar. We talked about land access, financial support, mentorship program, and then how do you work with other folks? That's not an entry barrier. That's just sort of learning and having the right mentors to know how to understand and try to come at problems, especially the ones in agriculture and food, which are very complicated and they're multifaceted. It's not just tech, it's not just agronomy. There is, regulation, there is social issues, there are cultural issues. So these are very complicated problems, and there's no one person who can understand all the sides, and which is challenging, but in one sense is great because that forces collaboration.
Exactly. That's what I love about it. And the idea of people collaborating, and it's kind of filling in the blanks. That's what a team is about, I think. It's about complementing each other. You can't know everything about everything. And whoever said that, I'm sorry, but I'm never going to believe it's someone who says that, everything about a topic.
Yeah.
And I've known people who are agronomists, engineers in this industry, and they still believe that there's so much more out there to learn. So it's also,
and I think getting outside perspectives is going to be very important for any industry, not just agriculture, right? So when people come from other industries into the space, yes, they will have a learning curve, but at the same time, they'll also bring newer perspectives, which might be useful. And I think that applies to any industry.
absolutely.
And given sort of the land situation that we talked about, and how difficult it is to get access to land, there are issues around just being able to work together with different folks. And this is what we talked about, collaboration. And so the more people we can get interested from not just within, but even outside the industry, I think that will work really well for the industry. And I think some of these newer tech tools and technologies and business models, I think that's a great entry point for people from outside to come in and provide a perspective. Because you can learn from mining or construction or finance or whatever, right? And bring those perspectives and those tools and those business models to agriculture or food. And I'm a strong believer that is in net, that is a positive. Yes, there will be frustrations on sort of two sides, somebody from outside, somebody from inside being able to have a conversation. But the more of that happens, I think we'll get more and more interesting perspectives. And those perspectives can go outside as well, right? Like something happens within food and ag, that can have applicability in some other industry, right? So yeah, I'm a big believer and a fan of this type of osmosis, which happens through people coming from other areas within agriculture and from people from agriculture going to other areas.
Absolutely. I love that. It's having a fresh set of eyes. What do you see? Which industries do you see most converging with agriculture, and either the overlap or supporting or complementing? What are the first ones that come to your mind?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of, depending on which part, given that food and agriculture is such a huge area, there are different parts and different industries which overlap, right? So if you think about, what happens on the farm in terms of equipment and how that works, there are a lot of parallels from, your transportation industry, self-driving cars, whatever, right? I mean, just warehouses, they have done a really good job of automating a lot of their processes. So there are a lot of parallels from those places that can come here. If you think about the product development process for coming up with a new seed or a new chemical, that is very much similar to like what happens in the pharmaceutical industry, right? It's a very similar process. Further downstream, if you think about how you get your products to market, whether it's fruits and vegetables or commodity row crops, I think there are a lot of similarities with other types of commerce and market linkages, and building out, finding buyers, connecting them with sellers. So depending on which part of the industry you're talking about, I think there are a lot of learnings both from a business model standpoint as well as a technology standpoint as to how, again, going back to that osmosis, like how can we learn from different parts of the world in terms of what is applicable in this particular area. So I think that is great because there is a wealth of experience and knowledge outside of ag that you can apply here, and vice versa.
Entirely in agreement with this. It's, of course, this industry is so vast, and it all depends on how granular we can get, and we can get pretty granular with that. I remember you saying about the labor in farms and how young people are perceiving this, and I want to know your perspective on how farm work is being looked at in terms of more experienced people and the ones that are just now breaking ground in these segments in farming, for example. And we were talking about earlier on how in certain cultures it's perceived in terms of women and the overall image people have about farming, that it's maybe outdated or they're less aware of all the amazing technology that there is. So what I'm asking is, how do you see the shift in perspective on farming and how more youth can come into this industry, seeing how it looks like today?
Right.
It's a complex question,
Yeah,
mostly,
yeah,
but
it
I'm
is a difficult
focusing
question.
on how
I
it
think, I
looks
mean,
right
there are,
now, how appealing
yeah,
it is.
yeah. Yeah, I think depending on which part of the world you are in, I think the answer will differ. And some of these are related to maybe policy or regulatory issues, like access to land, for example, right? How do you enable that? That's not a technology problem. That's a political, social, legal problem. And I'm no expert on that. But that needs to be, somebody needs to look at that and try to figure out what to do. I think in terms of just being able to sort of understand the possibilities, I mean, agriculture is a difficult, hard business. And as I said, I think one way to excite young people is, I believe, is through sort of a couple of things, right? So one is, a lot of young people are very concerned and, think a lot about climate change, for example. Um, and, obviously food and agriculture systems have a big role to play in terms of impacting climate change, hopefully in a positive way in the future. And so I think there is an element of mission-driven folks who can come in because they feel like, hey, they want to make an impact a positive impact on climate. And this is one way to do it. I mean, there are other ways to do it, but this would be one way to do it. I think that's an interesting one, because when you're young, you are very passionate, and you want to work on interesting things which have an impact and which provide meaning.
It's exciting.
So I think that's a very interesting approach, and I see that happening. I think second, purely from sort of skill set standpoint, I think the changing nature of agriculture and how tech, I believe, is going to become more and more important over the coming years. I think that is another way to attract young people, so they don't think of farming as purely as backbreaking work, spending a lot of time out there, and which is required. I'm not saying it's not. That's very important. But there are other aspects to it as well. Whether it's you could be a data scientist and be working in agriculture, or you could be a software engineer, or you could be doing robotics. So there are all these other avenues through which you could come in, which could be very exciting for folks, especially young people. And maybe in some parts of the world, maybe more people should get out of agriculture. Like, for example, in Asian countries where 50, 60, 70% of the population is engaged in agriculture. And I don't know what the right percentage is. In the US, it's 1 or 2%. It's 70% there. So, it's it should be. It feels like it should be definitely lower than 50 or 60% in terms of people involved in agriculture. The challenge is, because of all the land issues that we talked about, maybe they don't have other opportunities outside of agriculture, which are more appealing to them for whatever reason. There are not enough jobs. Because even though 50, like for example in India, even though 50, 60, whatever high percentage of the population is involved in agriculture, their contribution to GDP is much less than that. So you could say, yes, increase productivity, which would involve mechanization, maybe fewer people, more tech, better policies, and that might allow people to do something different. So even though I work in this field, there is an imbalance in terms of region as to how many people work and what kind of skills they bring to the table. And maybe that's what is required. I don't know. That's a difficult topic, but I do feel like if you look at history of different countries, as countries have developed economically, and moved from sort of poorer to sort of middle income countries and high income countries, you see the percentage of the population involved in things like agriculture or other industries going down, and sort of services and those type of industries increasing. And so that's why you'll see these two extremes, right? In the US, you have 1 or 2%, where in Asian countries, you have like 60, 70, 80% of the population involved in agriculture. And that seems very high. I don't know if 1% is low or high, I don't know. But definitely 70% seems very high to me. So we should also think about, how do you get people out of agriculture in those places to do something different, or make it much more productive. And you can do both, make it much more productive so that they actually can stay in there and make a good living.
I appreciate you saying that so much. The benefits of subtracting or cutting or taking out something in order for the rest of that to thrive. I'm entirely passionate about the concept of pruning. Cutting some branches which might be healthy in order for the rest of the tree to thrive. It's again taking people out of an industry, maybe as you said, would benefit more than their involvement there. So they can focus on areas where they actually can be productive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
happy,
And I
so
think,
happy you said that.
yeah. Like, for example, if you think about like what are some of the key technology innovations of the last 20 years, which have really had a positive impact on, let's say, inclusion or more young people coming into the space. I mean, obviously, mobile phones have had a massive impact on inclusion, right? Now, almost most people in the world can buy an inexpensive phone, and that they can communicate with other people, and that gives them a lot more agency in terms of what they do and what decisions they make. Same thing with social media, right? Now, if you have access to, even slow internet, you can be on social media or WhatsApp or whatever and communicate with people, and that gives you a voice and a lot of agency. And so I'm hoping that tools, given that we have the infrastructure of internet, which is still sort of very uneven, but hopefully that will improve. And smartphones, a tool like AI will also, and we can talk about that more, will create more inclusivity in terms of access to resources, especially knowledge and information.
Absolutely. And while we're on this, I'm thinking about these young people in agriculture or entrepreneurship, regardless. And we were talking earlier about entry barriers and so on, again, about perception. And I'm seeing a lot of hungry young entrepreneurs who want to get into these segments of agri-tech, biotech, food tech, and so on. And just a few weeks ago, I have to mention this because I feel like it's matching so well with what you just said. I met an entrepreneur who was entirely like moving and shaking the segment of food tech, and he's only a student, and he was so passionate about what he was doing. And again, I was noticing how what you were mentioning earlier about the not barriers, but what they would need in order to be successful, like funding and so on. And it doesn't just apply to women. And on the other side, I met a group of students, and those students were not in agronomy or veterinarians or so on. They were in aerospace. They are aerospace students, and I was talking to them about how agriculture converges so much with aerospace and aviation, and I realized how well they could complement their studies and their practical knowledge and experience by coming into agriculture. And I felt like kind of like I was reeling them into an industry where they weren't thinking of applying their skills and their chosen field of study. And I think that was entirely amazing how they found so many similarities. And I'm excited to see where it goes further. And I'm really, really happy that you mentioned about the convergence of these of other industries with agriculture. And we're also talking about AI, and of course, it's your specialization, and you are so active within it, especially through software is feeding the world. And please do share, how is it from your perception, talking with so many professionals nowadays? And I've seen your course, I've seen all the social media posts you have, and the newsletter. How is it from your perception that people are responding to this? How are they reacting right now beyond just saying, oh my God, how cool it is? Because we all know it's cool. But how do you see it in terms of shit actually getting done?
Yeah, I think, AI is not new. It's been around for quite some time. I think the earliest references to artificial intelligence happened in 1950s. And even machine learning has been around for quite some time. And obviously the ChatGPT moment was huge in terms of just consumer awareness of these type of technologies. Um, and people have been using machine learning and AI for quite some time, across different industries, including food and ag. So if for example, Amazon has been using it for fraud detection, for example, for many years, right? There's a lot of ML in your cars or on your phone. When you take a picture, there's a lot of ML which happens before it actually sort of saves the image, right? So it's almost everywhere. And I think within this space, depending on who you talk to, if somebody has been in this space for a couple of years, there is still a huge amount of skepticism, because there is a prevailing narrative that tech has failed in agriculture. At least here in the US, you hear that quite a bit. And the evidence that people point to, and which is sort of true, is if you look at the number of high-profile exits within the industry, there have been very few. People still talk about the Climate Corporation exit from 2013 for $1 billion, and it's more than 11 years ago. And I think the statute of limitations on that has expired many, many years ago, right? But because there are not many other examples, people still talk about it. So there is some logic to it from a business success and venture standpoint, and how much value it has created for folks. And I do sort of agree with some of that thesis, but at the same time, I think if you look at the number of people who have, people like me, who had no clue about AgTech, I'm working in it now. A lot of new people have come in with hopefully interesting ideas. People are getting more and more familiar with tech. And so in the long term, I think a lot of the investment that have happened over the last many years, I think will pay out. It'll just take longer than what a lot of us thought about. And sort of coming back to the AI question, so because of that, there is skepticism that, this is just one more thing that people are talking about, and it is not going to work. So there is some skepticism within some quarters. I'm definitely not in the skeptics camp, and maybe I'm biased because I work in this space. I do believe that it will have an impact. The timeline to that impact is debatable, whether it's a few years or longer. I think that is the debatable part, which I don't know the answer to. And that's what we talk about, or I talk about whenever I talk to people, that, compared to some of the other things that we have seen, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you remember the crypto NFT craze, a couple of years ago. And yes, there are some places where that is still applicable, but a lot of the noise has sort of died down on that, because people struggle to find real use cases. And that's one difference I see with AI. We can, if we start talking about use cases, I can list 20 within no time, and I'm sure there are hundreds of them more, right? And so there are a lot of use cases, because at the end of the day, any technology is successful if it solves a problem for someone, right? And it creates value. And I see a huge potential for things like AI. And I think this is, again, going back to sort of the inclusion and how to attract young people to this space. I think something like AI or tech, that's something that young people might be much more excited about. And so that could be a good way to bring them in. So overall, I'm very optimistic. I think the timeline is debatable. But I see a lot of real use cases where not only it is being applied today, but a lot of people are experimenting with new use cases. I think the one issue that I see today is, because of ChatGPT, everybody thinks, not everybody, a lot of people think that AI is ChatGPT, which is not true.
Yeah.
It's just one section of it, right? And so maybe there's a little bit of knowledge sharing that needs to happen there in terms of what does it mean, what are the types of problems you can apply. And so yeah, I'm very optimistic that more and more people will talk about it. It will be a good vehicle combined with things like climate change, food security, to bring in young people, because what do young people want? They want to work on again, I'm generalizing by a huge degree, so it's not true for everybody, but if there's a mission type problem with an impact, and if they can work on cool stuff, which is what new technology is, I think it's a perfect combination to attract young people to this space.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. It's I'm curious constantly about the use cases of AI, and I do interact with them almost on a daily basis. I've seen how more and more farmers are curious about applying it into their own farms. Sure, there is that risk appetite / experimentation in their own farms, because as all farmers know, it takes a lot to undo, if you can, or if ever, or let alone fix something, which you can't, especially if a technology fails. It's less likely to be able to bounce back, and they all know how much the work that they put in would be affected if something were to go wrong or different. And in the end, it's all about the experiment, of course, and agriculture is indeed a segment where, as you said, like the time frame, it's kind of subjective that way. You can't force nature in many ways, and all you can do is learn from what has happened, as we mentioned earlier, in terms of mentors and experience. And machine learning is, I think, it's all that it actually is seen as, is something that can bring so many benefits because it's learning.
Right.
And of course, you can actually make better decisions based on that. And two more things. One would be on the use cases, because I've noticed how excited those particular students were to see how aerospace can work with agriculture. Can you share one of those examples in broad strokes? Anything that you
I mean,
see
I think,
exciting? I bet you see
yeah,
all of them exciting, but
yeah. I
one
mean,
is enough.
for sure. I mean, if you think about all the smart equipment that is out there, right? Whether it's, people talk a lot about see and spray technology, for example. There are robots doing, different operations in the field. You're analyzing data and building yield models or doing weather prediction, right? There's a lot of machine learning and AI that's happening there. There is, simple things like text to speech, for example, right? And especially I keep bringing up these examples from Asian countries because there's just so many languages there, for example, right? And how do you make information accessible to all these folks? If you're just generating it in English or whatever, they're not going to be able to get that.
Yeah.
And giving them in an easy way. So things like, for example, there's a group called Digital Green, which works in India and Africa. They're using this chat GPT type approach coupled with WhatsApp, because everybody has WhatsApp in Asian countries, and I'm sure it's the same where you are.
Yeah.
How can you use existing infrastructure and have it powered by AI and all the information that you have to provide, extension services and knowledge to a lot of the agronomists and farmers out there, right? So these are real examples of applying AI. You see that in, your product discovery, for example, right? Let's say you're trying to come up with a new mode of action or active ingredient for, let's say, an herbicide, and that's a very expensive, long process. And you could potentially use AI to do a lot of analysis in silico and look at more options instead of, not just instead of, but sort of to go with your existing experimental approaches, right? So there are a lot of different examples already out there which are working and they're creating value. And we have to make sure we do those things in an inclusive fashion so that, people have access to those tools, or you are, a lot of the AI models are based on data that you give it. And so if your data sets are biased, then your outcomes are going to be biased. So you have to be very careful in what kind of data you're providing to these models, because at some level they're dumb. They depend on what you feed them.
Yeah.
And if you feed them biased information, and we've seen examples of that over the last couple of years, right?
Yep, I have.
And they can be deployed in different ways. So there is an interesting book I would like to recommend. It's called Weapons of Math Destruction.
Nice. It was going to be one of my next questions about a book recommendation. Love it. Thank you.
So
Can you say that
that
again?
talks about a lot of cases where these type of tools have been deployed in a way which was not beneficial, it was harmful, right? So we have to be careful when we apply these tools.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility. Quoting from comic books, but true. Can you say the recommendation one more time, please? The title?
Yeah, it's called Weapons of Math, M-A-T-H, math, like mathematics, Weapons of Math Destruction.
Awesome.
I think that's an interesting book to read. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And I was listening to the course you had on AI for agriculture leaders, for agri-food leaders. And you mentioned something about grain grading. And for me, it was entirely fascinating about how that works. And again, I believe that we could talk for hours about this subject. And I'm entirely curious about this. The one thing I would love to take away out of our discussion, of course, is first of all, the book. And the second, what is something that resource you believe women and the youth could benefit from to facilitate their entry into these industries in agri-food, agri-tech? And what is one advice you could give?
Yeah, I mean, I think these sound cliched, but I think they're still true. I think I would say read a lot. Read as much as you can. By read, I mean learn. That there are different ways to learn now. You could be on YouTube and learn a lot. So, and take a lot of notes, right? Because when you take notes, you sort of synthesize what's happening in your brain. I think we talk about this one a lot, like find role models and mentors who boost your ambition, your curiosity and confidence. All of us need it. And especially when you're young, you need it a lot more. And then connect with people. I think the internet is a huge place. It is many times bigger than what you or I or anybody thinks it is. And people are extremely generous with their time and resources, right? So yes, it can be intimidating, but if you're a young person, just reach out to someone that you want to talk to. Send them an email. Set a goal of I'm going to talk to 1 or 2 new people every week, let's say. And I think that will do wonders to your learning curve, your confidence, and your perspective, because you will just having those conversations will help you. And contrary to what most people think, people are extremely generous, especially online. They will give you their time, their contacts, their resources, and a lot of other help, right? So take advantage of that. Like, don't ignore that. So I think these all sound cliched, but I think they would, just set a goal of like talking to 1 new person every week, right? I think that would be a good forcing function for you to do these other things that I'm talking about. That
is awesome. They're not cliche. These are what make great people, and it's you can apply it in every industry. And I thank you so much for sharing that.
Irrespective of industry, yes.
So thank you so much for your openness. I really appreciate this. It's been, and it continues to be, a huge excitement for me whenever we have a conversation. And I am hoping, because again, we could talk about agriculture and technology for hours on end because it's so vast. So I'm hoping to have another episode in the future, of course, taking into account all the developments in the world and of course our schedules and wherever our paths will take us in these industries. Again, thank you so much for having this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Thea, for having me. This was fun. And I hope you continue to do the great work that you're doing of inspiring people and connecting them.
Thank you for your contribution, Rhishi.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and for your support in amplifying women's voices in agriculture STEM. Reach out and join us if you want to create ripples of impact and contribute to a lasting legacy in this industry.